You know what's amazing is you watch, first you see the statistics in the Obama years and all the times they used tear gas. Do you remember any reports, any hysteria from the media about that?
Well, number one, no. And how long does it take you to figure this out? When it comes to Obama, when he uses tear gas, he's protecting the country. The narrative is that Trump is a cruel, heartless bastard, only works if he uses tear gas on kids. And it undercuts the argument if the Obama administration used tear gas to protect our border from being overrun. The question for the country is, what do you say to the people who shot the canisters? I stand behind the men and women on the border, standing between us and people who want to cross illegally. When you're slamming the tear gas, you're slamming the people we put on the border to protect us, and that's what disgusts me the most.
What are they supposed to do?
Yeah,
when
what are
rocks
they supposed
and
to do?
bottles are being pelted at them? Or what are we supposed to do when they're breaking down barriers and want to rush the border? This is what we were warning about before the election,
Yes.
and it's now coming to pass, and there are thousands more still coming.
Well, I've been a lawyer in the military most of my adult life. You use the least amount of force possible to protect you and secure the mission, and the mission is to protect the border from being overrun. So tear gas keeps the people apart. You don't get in a fight. That's a good thing. The bottom line is Donald Trump was right to call the caravan out weeks ago. He's right to make sure it never crosses the border. People throughout the world are watching the president. If he blinks here, his credibility on securing the border is dead. He's not going to blink. And to my Democratic friends, how do you expect the public to work with us to fix a broken immigration system if you support one wave after another? A lot's at stake here. The president's not going to bend. He's not going to back down. And I hope the Republicans in Congress will stand behind it.
So President Obama tear gasses people on a monthly basis. We now have literally, and we'll talk to Kirstjen Nielsen, the Secretary of Homeland Security, we have identified, Mexico too has identified at least 500, maybe 600 criminals coming across that border that have integrated themselves into the migrant population. And that means when I sat through a briefing with Rick Perry in Texas when he was governor, a security briefing that Obama should have been at. When I sat through it, they had 7-year period of time, 642,000 crimes committed against Texans. Some minor, many serious, including murder. I've interviewed angel moms and dads more than I ever wanted to in my whole life. Lost their lives to illegal immigrants that we even had in our justice system and never deported. At what point does the government bear the responsibility that they didn't do their job and enforce the law? What culpability do they have?
Well, I think we have a lot of culpability as a nation from ignoring this problem. You know, doing the same old thing and expecting a different outcome is insanity. President Trump is going to stop the caravan. The next one's coming, won't come if this one is stopped. He'll shut down the border if he has to. Democrats should give him the money he needs to secure the border. If they deny him the funding to secure our border, President Trump is going to push back and fight back. And this is a day of reckoning for the American people. What message do you want to send to the rest of the world about our border? If you want to be open borders, this is your chance. If you want to stand firm, this is also your opportunity, and I hope Democrats understand you got to really hate Trump to not see this caravan's a problem for the American people.
Let me ask you the last question about Mueller. The president said he's not going to stop this. Never had any plans. He said it numerous times now. At this point, how do we justify as a nation that believes in, we're a constitutional republic, we agree in equal application of our laws, equal justice under the law, and Hillary paid for phony Russian lies to influence the American people. That was used as a fraud on the FISA court, would never verify or corroborate it. Hillary never identified as having paid for it. And then it goes further. Then it's used as part of a leak strategy. The bulk of information, according to yours and Charles Grassley's memo, used to obtain the FISA warrants. Why has Mueller, if he cares about Russian interference, she paid for it? Why is that not an issue?
Well, you can't blame Mueller because it's not his charter to look at that. I do blame the Department of Justice.
Why is it not? If he's looking for Russia collusion, why is that not within his mandate when somebody's loan application is within his mandate?
Well, it might be, but I blame the Department of Justice for not appointing a special counsel to look at the FISA warrant. They really got away with a lot here, and if I'm chairman of the committee next year, we're going to look at the FISA warrant problem. I promise you we will.
You're going to get to the bottom of that? Could we get to the bottom of Hillary's emails and destruction of emails?
We need a special counsel to look at all this. Why was the FBI in the tank for Clinton?
Right.
Did they have a political bias? This screams for a special counsel. That's why Trump was so upset with the Sessions Department of Justice.
Lindsey Graham, Senator, thank you for being with us.
All right, welcome back. Refusing to flinch, the president demanding a deal with Democrats to secure $5 billion that he wants to build the wall. But what would a deal look like? And can Congress get to it or get it done before the partial shutdown deadline of December 7th? Very close now. Joining me now is Republican strategist Kimberly Klacik. Kim, thanks for coming on this morning.
Good morning, Rob.
Let's take a quick look at comparison, what the Democrats want to give on this, what the president wants. The Dems looking to spend $1.6 billion, not necessarily on a wall, but on securing the border. The president wants $3.4 billion more for just a portion of his wall. I did think it was interesting to hear Chuck Schumer come out there and say that, hey, we want to spend $1.6 billion to secure the border. I think that's some kind of progress, right?
That is, and that's a very specific amount. So Congress passed $14 trillion in spending, but we're being told they can't get $5 billion together to support funding our southern border. The problem with that is it's a charade. The only way I can explain it is to break it down by dollar. So in the fiscal year of 2019, we'll spend $4.4 trillion. $1.2 trillion of those dollars goes into a discretionary spending fund. Half of that goes to the military, the rest goes to domestic programs. So we do have funding there. We also have $111.4 billion sitting aside in an emergency fund that isn't even included in the budget. Half of that, or more than half of that, goes to spending money overseas to fund wars and everything that we have going on over there. But we do have money there. Now we have the departments of education, departments of HUD. We have all these departments that end up with $18.7 billion in emergency funding. So we do have money there. So the problem isn't about money. This is about Democrats and anti-Trumpers sticking it to Trump so he doesn't do his job, which is fulfill his campaign promises.
Yeah, well, we know the Democrats hate the idea of the wall. They despise the idea of the wall. The president's been doing the rounds, speaking to a lot of media that's not necessarily friendly to him. He had a Politico interview. He had a Washington Post interview. I'm going to pull a quote here from that Politico interview. I'm going to read it to you. This is in regards to maybe putting together a deal between DACA and the wall, which is something that we saw almost come to fruition maybe a year ago, and then it fell apart. The president saying if the court rules in favor of Obama regarding deferred action for childhood arrivals for DACA, having that right for the DACA, it's going to be a disaster because we will get nothing. We will get nothing done. The president is hoping that when the Justice Department takes DACA to the Supreme Court, that they will rule that you can't protect these kids. And then he can use that as a bargaining chip to get his wall. What do you think the chances are that the Supreme Court rules in against DACA and in President Trump's favor?
Well, I'm not sure if they will rule in favor of Trump, unfortunately, in this situation. But I do think that the Democrats here, they're playing a political game, too. This is all about leverage for either side. The president even said he doesn't want to see DACA recipients go, but he does need that leverage to ask for his money for the wall. And he's just asking for a physical boarding wall. He's not even talking about all the money that we really need to secure the southern border.
Yeah. Well, here's another $1 million question that a lot of people ask is whether or not either party really wants to solve this problem. Because every political party needs a reason and needs a way to drag their voters up off the couch and go vote on a cold Tuesday in November. And this is one way that they get that done. What do you think?
Yeah, this is definitely, it's a political game, and it's unfortunate because DACA recipients and so many families, their lives hang in the balance here, but they're going to keep kicking this can down the road because they don't, like you said, this is all about votes and elections, and this isn't really about the American people or those that are here now as DACA recipients. This is about them and their political gain.
Well, you look at the numbers here, when you ask people, most people don't want open borders in this country, but also most people do want those DACA kids protected. So it makes you wonder where this goes with the Supreme Court and what happens here. The Justice Department does intend to take that to the Supreme Court at some point here in the future. We're going to have to see what happens. Kimberly, thank you so much for your time this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Rob.
He's a great person. But he's better than he used to be, because I think now when you get into it, like really get into the details of what China's doing and don't just look at a spreadsheet in Goldman Sachs, it's bad. And you see this, Pat, like there are a lot of little mini Buchananites on the issue of trade now popping up all over media. You really see people seeing what China has gotten away with all these years.
I run into them constantly in green rooms. But you're exactly right. Look, the Chinese have an economic nationalist policy and have had one for 30 years. And the whole idea is to hold the value of their currency down in order to export massively to the world, to, in effect, transfer industries and production from countries like the United States into China and use these massive surpluses of wealth. They've had something like $4 trillion in surpluses with the United States in the last 25 years. And this is the money they use to expand their Belt and Road project. They are thinking long term. They're thinking like Americans did in the 19th century, that eventually we're going to be the greatest power in the world. We're going to replace Great Britain and the British Empire. That's the way Americans thought, and it's the way the Chinese think and believe. And the question is for Americans, have we become so dependent upon consumer goods produced by China and Asia and in other countries that we simply are unwilling to pay the temporary price to restore economic independence of our own country? And that's the question that Trump faces. But he is the only one that has stood up and faced it in the last 25 years since George H.W. Bush.
I mean, it's really a miracle. Pat, every time I get frustrated by something in politics, I think to myself, who would have thought that, like, let's say in the middle, let's go back to 2011 or go back to 2005 under Bush. Who would have thought that this guy, Donald Trump, would single-handedly turn around our trade policy by putting in a couple of great people like Lighthizer at Trade and a few others, Navarro at the White House is doing a good job, and really change minds? I mean, there's this piece today in the Washington Post. China's specialists who long supported engagement are now warning of Beijing's efforts to influence American society. It was a big report that came out, the Hoover Institution and the Asia Society Center for U.S.-China Relations. It's titled Chinese Influence in American Interests, Promoting Constructive Vigilance. And it pulls together a range of examples of Chinese operations, from legitimate activities such as lobbying to more covert, coercive, or corrupting behavior, such as pressuring Chinese students studying in the United States to spy on their Chinese peers on American campuses, and also, of course, to try to siphon off research information while they're studying at Stanford or MIT or RPI or any of these other colleges and universities that have extensive research operations in key areas.
You know, what happened here is the utter, total, complete naivete of the Republican Party in the 1990s and the first 10 years of the 21st century about the nature and character of the people they were escorting into the WTO, giving these massive surpluses, giving them most favored nation trade status, saying that, look, let's buy goods from them and when we'll escort them into the world stage. And now they wake up to discover that maybe the tiger is predatory. And now all the evidence comes in of thievery, of American technology, of currency manipulation, of actions utterly inconsistent with a country that wants to be a friendly trade partner, and thoroughly consistent with a country that wants to become first on earth militarily, strategically, and every other way. And now even these guys are waking up. You wonder how many of these folks that are now hardliners on China were voting for MFN for China and normal trade relations and bringing them into the WTO and all the rest of it. It's the same, with the foreign policy. We're tied down in all these places all over the world, and they thought it was a great idea in the 90s and first decade of the 21st century to get into them.
Well, listen, speaking of what you just said about the reliance on Chinese money and Chinese investment, Chinese consumers, Tiffany's, like the jewelry Tiffany's fortunes remain married to Chinese consumers. Tiffany's was hurt by reduced demand from Chinese consumers, both in China and those shopping in the U.S. China accounts for about a third of all luxury brand spending. As Chinese spending increased, there was a boon for luxury brands. But the overdependence poses a risk, too. And it shows you that Louis Vuitton and Prada and all these other it's just a money game for them. There's no thought. They're not governments. There's no thought about, well, okay, how is this ultimately going to affect the countries and from which we started and which we originated. That's not how they operate.
Their allegiance is to the bottom line on the balance sheet. It's to money for the salaries for the fellas in charge and make sure the stock price stays high and it stays well on the market. And who cares if the factory's being shifted to China rather than the United States, because the allegiance is to the corporation, it's not to the country. So, but again, people are waking up, but the key question is, have we gone too far down this road to where I give Donald Trump credit. He's making a tremendous effort, and there's no doubt people are telling him if you keep playing hardball with the Chinese, it could really foul up the economy for 2020, or the market could go down, and that could really damage us. So I think he's doing the best he can, but historically, people are going to hold a lot of these globalists to account.
Yeah, I think we see the fruits of the Wall Street Journal mindset, which was really open borders, open markets.
I looked the other day. I was looking up something we might have forgotten because I was fighting against it 10 or 12 years ago. The North American Union. The whole idea. We're going to merge Mexico, the United States, and Canada. And there was a quote in the story by Bob Bartley, who was the editorial editor of the Wall Street Journal, that, Vicente Fox has an ally for the North American Union idea right here in the Wall Street Journal. I mean, no newspaper in America pushed harder for this globalist free trade, open up to China, open borders. Indeed, the Wall Street Journal used to campaign for a constitutional amendment of 5 words: there shall be open borders. I mean, that's a Wall Street Journal of Bob Bartley, intellectual leader or one of the intellectual leaders of the conservative movement. And now a lot of the folks who were cheering that on are down there calling, build that wall.
Well, again, the tyranny of the expert class. We've seen this time and again. Well, what do you make of this row over the Turkish consulate for Saudi Arabia, and this Khashoggi disappears, gets all cut up clearly by someone operating for Saudi Arabia? What's your thought on that?
Well, my take is that that I can't believe that 15 guys in a hit squad, including members of the Saudi Crown Prince's security detail, went in and murdered this guy and carved him up, unless the Saudi Arabian the Crown Prince, had ordered it himself. I do agree with Trump on this. Look, Saudi Arabia is an important and vital piece to U.S. foreign policy in the Persian Gulf and in the Middle East. And they're led by an individual now who is palpably guilty of cold-blooded, premeditated murder of a journalist. And he's not an American citizen, but he's a Saudi journalist, and he was killed in a consulate. So I think that the attitude of the Senate, frankly, I've been against the intervention in Yemen, and I think the attitude of the Senate is understandable, but this is going to present a real problem, Laura, and I tell you why. the Saudis, the Israelis, and the neocons and the hardliners are really pushing toward a closer and closer confrontation with Iran. They want them dealt with sanctions, and if not that, deal with them the other way. And Saudi Arabia is a vital piece to that puzzle. And that's what I think Pompeo was saying up on the Hill yesterday. Listen, fellas, you can't drive the Saudis away from us because they're part of our anti-Iran strategy, and that's what you guys are all for. So it's going to be interesting. The Saudi prince is down in Buenos Aires now.
Yep.
It's going to be a great meeting.
Yeah, this is.
They
this
got
is,
Xi Jinping and Putin and Trump.
Putin. That sounds like a joke. Putin,
Keep your eyes
Xi,
on
and
the Crown Prince.
Putin, Xi, and the Crown Prince walk into a bar. Trump doesn't drink, so he goes in and says, hey, Pat, I have to play this for you. So at the Baker Institute in Houston, you had Jim Baker, of course, former, when you look up GOP establishment. Yeah. So they're talking about civility in politics. Let's listen.
The biggest challenge we're going to have over the next 10, 15, 20 years is to return to a civic conversation in which if I say this is a chair, we agree this is a chair. We can disagree on